Welcome to Unlocked, an NAMFS podcast. In our third episode of our Stronger Together member series, we have a conversation with Charles Carrasquillo, owner of Field Pros and regional member. Let's get started.
Perfect. Well, we're excited to join you from the Unlocked podcast for NAMFS. I'm Sam Dominguez. I'm joined today by Charles from Field Pros. Charles, we would love for you to give a little bit of a background about where you've been and what you're doing currently.
Thanks, Em. I am I guess you would consider me a regional out of Florida. We're inspections only. We have a presence currently in about 8 states. We're working with a network of somewhere around 70 to 75 contractors at this point doing inspection work. Good quality, good quality people. I'm very fortunate to have a very solid team. I got into the industry. I've been in the industry since '08, so not quite the 20-year mark just yet. But I came into the field as a rep. I came into the field as a homeowner, actually, who had a rep pull up in front of my house, and that was my first introduction to field services and what this all entailed. And I went to work for that particular company, believe it or not, way back when, and here we are today.
That's fantastic. So you've seen the whole gamut, both from a time perspective, it sounds like, and from a situational perspective. So
absolutely, we were still burning back then, '07, '08 time frame, burning pictures on the CDs and then the SD cards, and here we are.
And here we are now, progressed to the cloud and everything in between. So that's really good. Sir. I like it. Well, it was good. We appreciate the introduction. For those of you out there who don't know who I am, I'm Sam Dominguez. I'm with Veris currently, working with the group over Prop Preservation Wizard. Like Charles, I was unknown to this space up until a handful of years ago. I have a contracting background, so it's been a pleasure to get to know people like Charles and yourselves listening in. It's a great group of people to get to know and a great business. So appreciate the time. So Charles, today we want to talk a little bit specifically about NAMFS and kind of your history there and what your take is on a few things. I'd be curious when you first got involved or what motivated you and your company to maybe participate and be part of NAMFS.
So, curiously enough, I was trying to think back as to how long I've been an NAMFS member. I think it hasn't been quite 10 years. It's probably more like 7, I'd imagine, somewhere in that time frame. I came to NAMFS late. Obviously, when I first started my organization, well, let me backtrack. I worked as a rep for probably a good solid 6-7 years for another organization, and I didn't branch off on my own until I did everything with events, right? So Hurricane Matthew is kind of when things took off for me here in the state of Florida, and I kind of branched off into my own entity. I started with a handful of inspectors here in the state, and I probably operated, you just kind of figuring it out and piecing it together for about 5 years before I even came across NAMFS. As far as once I became aware of the fact that there was a community of like-minded individuals out there, there was an organization that represented us, that spoke for us. I was right on board with seeking it out. The first thing I needed and wanted was community. I wanted to figure out how others were doing this job, how others were managing the obstacles that we see on a day-to-day basis. And the other thing that I wanted to try and seek out was an alternative. Up until that point, really the only organized structure I had come across was online communities, whether they're Facebook or other resources. I wanted something that was in a different vein because that all seemed to be speaking to the lows of the industry, and I wanted to be more on the wavelength of the highs. What are we doing well? What can we do differently? How do we get to the next level? And the other piece of the puzzle was I was trying to figure out how to grow my business, and NAMFS seemed to be the key for that.
That's interesting. It's a really fascinating treatise, right? Like the internet tends to bring out the worst, regardless of what it is. And so, it's good. So in that vein, I'd be curious, like what specific things or values did you find that you were looking for once you joined NAMFS? Like, what were some of the reasons? What are some things you were able to draw out of the organization? I mean, you mentioned one, which was kind of like-minded individuals, but then also talking about the highs. What were some of those highs you were looking for, kind of that validation or specific things you were getting out of the organization?
Well, the networking was obviously huge for us. It was being able to put faces to client relationships that we had been navigating for several years at that point. Being able to sit side by side with someone and enjoy a meal, and talk about some of the day-to-days, talk about some of the challenges, talk about some of the real world situations that we deal with as boots on the ground, versus what they might expect from their vantage point. The fact that we have as a body of professionals, because there's really no other way to put it. We are field professionals, that we have a representation, that we have a voice, that we have a unified organization that is driving change within our industry, necessary change, vital change within our industry, that is voicing the concerns that we have, that is seeking to, connect each and every one of us all up and down the supply chain and or the ecosystem. That's been a huge aspect of it. Alignment, just getting a feel and an understanding for how others are doing things, what clients really actually truly expect. Because we have found in a lot of situations where, we're handed down these set of instructions that sometimes are antiquated, that sometimes are outdated, that, there hasn't been a lot of effort and or resources put into keeping up to date, getting a better, direct, more real world interpretation of what is actually being sought, what the priorities are and what aren't. There's a lot of redundancy that we come across in our industry. Unfortunately, I'm sure that, that horse has been beat to death and beyond. There's some things that just today they're valuable. There's other things that have fallen by the wayside that were once valuable that are no longer. So just, getting a better feel for those types of things has really been invaluable, and NAMFS has been integral in really shedding that light.
Gotcha. So it sounds a lot like, getting that combined unity and voice to, fix redundancies, any type of regulation, getting an understanding as things are coming down to all of us kind of in the industry. I'm curious, are there specific things for your business you were able to draw in addition to that? Obviously the community, the voice, moving things along, but were there ever specific challenges you as a business you were able to kind of solve, with kind of that mind share or that community with the group at NAMFS?
Um, I hate to go back to the networking, but I think that has been one of the biggest benefits. It used to be that we've got these nameless entities out here that are working in our areas, and the first thing that jumps out is we're competitors, we're competition. I've been fortunate enough to not only make some really solid relationships with other regionals across the country, but even some that are here in the same area that we have a presence in, and we've been able to migrate that concept of competitors to an alliance, if you will, where we find ourselves cooperating, where we find ourselves sharing resources. I have relationships with people in my very same markets where we pick up the phone and we say, hey, I've got a contractor. He's phenomenal, but I can't keep him well fed enough.
Okay.
Can you use him with your client base? And we turn around and now we're both feeding this same contractor, because a well-fed contractor is a motivated contractor. He's consistent, he's reliable, he's dependable. He is a more integral part of both teams, as opposed to having two separate contractors that we necessarily may or may not be able to keep fed. And I think that's a difference in philosophy and a shift in philosophy that I wouldn't have been privy to or had the opportunity to even come across if I didn't have that FaceTime with others in my industry, in my market.
That's awesome. We use a term around here called co-opetition, right? So we know,
Yeah,
to your point,
absolutely.
we technically compete in spaces, we're chasing the same customers, but we also know from an industry perspective, if we can all kind of raise our standards and our expectations, it helps everybody. People perform better, they have more work, things like that. So it sounds like, that's a big lift to you guys. I got to imagine it's finding new vendors, it's finding new partnerships, ways to expand your business, but at the same time, it goes both ways. Somebody's going to find you as well as they see the work you're doing.
Absolutely. And I think it builds bench strength, for both organizations, for everybody involved.
So it's cool. So I'd be curious also. So obviously you've been a part of it for a while. You're seeing, the flex we're dealing from a market perspective, regulatory, the shifts and the volatility we deal with. Does a growing membership help us? Like whether we're looking at just NAMFS specifically, but then kind of to dovetail into that question as well, the industry as a whole. Like, is that helpful to you and to your business? If so, what's your take?
I think that growing the membership and the representation right now is probably more integral than ever. I think Eric, you guys date back to what, 88, if I'm not mistaken, right? You guys are coming up on a 40-year mark. I would put, if I were a betting man, I'd put some money on that. We're going to see more changes here in the next 5 years than you guys have probably seen in the last 35. AI has changed the game completely. And as a industry, at least from a inspections perspective, and even to some degree in a preservation space, AI is going to change the way things are done. I think that with the complement of AI to the industry and the existing technology is going to take, let me phrase this appropriately. It's going to change things to a dynamic that might put in question the value that we bring to the table as a organized industry, right? And I think that increasing our voice and increasing the focus on what this organization and what this infrastructure of professionals that are all aligned in making sure that the needs of the ecosystem from top to bottom are met, bring to the table. I can't emphasize that enough. I think, if I were a betting man in 5 years, we see something like this inspection aspect going towards like a gig work type of structure, and I'm sure there's people that work, trying to figure out how they can implement something like that today. There's some of that already existing to a certain degree. So we have to make sure that we unify, that we fine tune and polish what we bring to the table so that we can make ourselves indispensable in this space.
Yeah, I like that thought. I think that, one advantage perchance, like you stated, is, if the group can kind of get ahead of it and compare notes and talk about how they're implementing and what the strategies look like as AI impacts it or other factors, it's almost cautionary to our peers as well, right? Like, hey, this is a good thing, but have you thought about these specific questions as you consider changing the way you do your work or implementing this solution or whatever, kind of raising tides for everybody potentially. So I'd agree. I think what we talk about, at least in our circles a lot, is like, look, I think we all need to be willing to embrace the change that's coming. That's going to make the difference for the people that are able to stay in and stay busy, and the ones that kind of get priced out or moved out, right? So I think it's good of you to recognize that change is coming. You got to be
getting
ready
harder and harder. I mean,
Yeah.
Here we are today, here we are, March, whatever the case may be. And, it's no secret. We've seen an increase in fuel prices across the country that are really putting a squeeze on us today,
Yeah.
right? So every day brings new challenges in this industry. No 2 days are the same. And the changes that come that impact how we do things are fast and furious. The changes that come that help how we do what we do aren't quite so. They come at a much slower pace, right? A more deliberate pace.
Yeah.
So it's important to make sure that we're doing everything in the middle that we can to continue to provide a quality product, sustain, ourselves to continue to grow, and continue to put forth the best effort that we can with the circumstances that we're dealing with. It's nonstop.
Yeah, I agree with you. So in that vein, it's a good dovetail. So you've been participative. You already intimated, look, we're coming up on almost, 40 years of NAMPS, rocking and rolling. I'd be curious, like for those that kind of sit out on the periphery that are hesitant to jump in, hesitant to participate, Like, what would your encouragement, if you were sitting toe to toe to somebody who's like, I'm not sure if I want to participate with NAMFS or join, but has, I mean, what's your pitch? What's your pitch, and what would you tell them to do to get started? Like to get started. Obviously, you've seen value. I'm curious on what your pitch would be.
Oh, for me, the selling point was the very first thing I did was come to an AMS conference. Once I got in a room with like-minded individuals, with people that were dealing with the same types of ins and outs that I am dealing with on a day-to-day basis, the same headaches with our vendors, the same headaches with our and challenges with our resources, with our clients, for that matter. And we started to share ideas and perspectives. Things opened up exponentially for me. It made us a stronger organization. It allowed me to go back and coach my team in a more efficient, effective manner. It opened me up to some playbooks that I had never considered. So I would encourage anybody, go out and solicit peers. Take part in a conference. The newsletters are huge. They keep me in tune with some of the ongoings at higher levels, and at every level for that matter, of the industry, that may impact us directly or indirectly. I think that the podcasts here have been phenomenally informative. Putting us at these conferences, you can only put so many people together in a room, right? Yeah. So this gives us an opportunity to gain some exposure from some others in the industry that maybe we haven't been privy to. People that maybe we intended to sit down and have a meal next to at one of the conferences that we didn't get an opportunity to. I think every little bit helps. I'm a very firm believer of educating myself as fully as possible and exposing myself as fully possible to as much information as I can that touches the industry where I'm making my living. And I think NAMFS helps us do that in a very organized, structured, and positive manner.
I'm sold, and I'm a sales guy, so that's saying something. But I tend to agree with you. I think you've hit it right on the head. I think that just lean in, give it a shot. I mean, we got nothing to lose. Look, we've gone through a lot of changes. There's more change coming. I tend to agree with you. I think those informal and formal moments that a group like NAMFS provides gives you that confidence and that validation. Like, yeah, I can do this. I can keep moving. So I tend to agree with you. It's a great thought and great point. So it has been a pleasure chatting with you about NAMFS. I really appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you on the road and hearing about how things are going for you and for your company. But it's been great connecting. So appreciate the time, Charles.
Absolutely. I appreciate you guys having me. And I'm excited as to where NAMFS is leading us. I think that there's there are going to be some challenging times ahead, but I think that we've got the right direction in place, and we've got the right people all focused on the same direction to take us to that next level and hopefully get us, past those hiccups here and there.
Completely agree. Couldn't agree more. Appreciate it. Eric, anything in closing? We appreciate the time.
Thank you for watching and listening to Unlocked, a NAMFS podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the NAMFS YouTube channel or follow us wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. We'll be back next Wednesday with another Season 2 conversation, and we look forward to having you join us.